God bless. This is NFL Moneyball. We're in NFL Week 16, and this program is being brought to you by NFL Extended Strategic Principles, found on the web at nfl-esp.com. And I am your host, Mark Anthony DeBello, and you may find me on the World Wide Web at markanthonydebello.com. And for more information on this program, please click on the Sports tab. So, God bless, we're in Week 16 of the National Football League season. Today is Friday, December the 19th. As with previous broadcasts, I'm going to split the broadcast in two and offer some commentary and insights into a few other sports today, as well as college football and different social issues going on in the world of sport a little bit. And then in the second half of the program, concentrate more on the NFL from an investment perspective using NFL ESP data, which is primarily associated with a number we call the power spread, as I've described to you before, a number that's more accurate than a different spread number that's disseminated and distributed by entities out west for the purpose of those who might have a financial interest in games or, in some cases, even fantasy sports. But the NFL ESP program or system that we've used to consult with the Chicago Bears and some other professional teams around the league a bit, that information and program and system is invaluable to helping a team produce wins up to 10 or 15% more, 2 or 3 wins per season in the National Football League in a 16-game season, and the same ratio for other sports. So that also, the NFL ESP system has other applicable usage, and I'm going to mention that here momentarily. But again, let's get on with the broadcast. I thank you and want to thank the listeners who improved the number of hits on this, if you will, podcast or broadcast or audio cast, just running a couple video pictures and a little montage with my speaking, and the listenership went up. It seems that those few commentaries I made on Facebook are working, so hopefully you are blessed by something or prognostications or predictions or production value or prophetic things that I noted. Although last week, and I made a note on this in week 15, I wanted to mention that my confidence had been shattered, and confidence for any athlete or anybody in media even, or any profession, or any even spiritual matter. You really need confidence and, security in yourself and belief in yourself and faith to really truly be effective. And I must admit, after 15 weeks of the season and partnering with some people or involving myself with some people and in certain areas, and definitely here out west where this broadcast is coming to you from the Sin City, Las Vegas, Nevada. Just yesterday I was in the City of Angels, Los Angeles, California. My mind was probably a little bit clearer and more accurate, but no excuses. Through a lack of confidence and attrition near here to the end of the NFL regular season, it was a little less than accurate, or a lot less than accurate last week. We'd been running high, if you will, and doing very well. But anyway, having said that, so I'm offering an apology if any of the information or data to any listeners misled them. So having said that, let me go through some notes here that I believe are hopefully pretty accurate and will be in relation to the NFL ESP system and some other things. So let me first talk about a sport quickly outside of football, NBA basketball. I made a note here about Carmelo Anthony. I know the Knicks are struggling this season, and just have to say that any team that Carmelo, he's younger than I am. I mentioned this before. If you're younger than me, I call you your first name unless you demand otherwise. Or if I'm old, well, usually I would just always call you. I should get some respect myself. So if you're younger than me, I'll call you by your first name, and if you're older, you are called Mr. or perhaps even Sir. But nonetheless, Carmelo Anthony, just by his nature, I think, and I just know this just in my innate judging of talent, his team will never win a championship, whatever team he's on. He is one of those players that, and I know this from my days of playing basketball, I really wasn't very team-oriented, to be honest with you. I was really self-serving in my play. It really should have worked in my case in my high school playing basketball days, as I was, I believe, clearly the better or best player on the team. And the team model was a slow-down pace where we should have been a fast-paced game. But nonetheless, all that aside, I know the spirit of Carmelo Anthony playing basketball, and I don't believe he's ever, for not only financial reasons, but for ways he's perceived by other players around the league and what his goals and agenda is, he's never going to be a part of a truly championship team. It's just virtually impossible. The other note I wanted to make in a more positive light regarding basketball was the plan or the offensive scheme, if you will, I guess, of the owner of the Sacramento Kings. I hope I pronounced his name correctly, Vivek Randive. I met this gentleman at the MIT Sports Analytics Conference last year. Seemed very focused. Didn't get a very long meeting with him. Did leave some literature on the NBA ESP program, trying to help his Sacramento Kings. But I believe in what this gentleman says in the sense that he's been successful in business. He had some coaching experience, even if it was with a young girls basketball team. The legendary John Wooden once said that girls basketball or women's basketball, he watches that because it's more played to the purity of the game, the way the game was initially designed or invented by James Naismith, and then so on thereafter. So even with the rules changes. So my point is, this man is a successful man in business, seems like a decent enough man, and I know he studies analytics and metrics and data, and I would have more faith in him than the media who slander him. I mean, when the media, any media member on this planet makes as much as this man does or owns an NBA team, then they can slander him as such. But again, that's typically the way the media operates. They have a somehow often lack of respect or a worldview that's, not as strategic or as, open-minded or revolutionary, if you will, or out of the box like many at this MIT Sports Analytics Conference these people are. And I can see a lot of the relationships that are made, especially through ESPN, with some of their data on their shows and even a sports book out here in Las Vegas. I saw these people shaking hands with one another, and I know actually Coach Carl, who is mentioned to perhaps, I think, be the next coach of the Kings. I've known Coach Carl for a while, worked with him. I don't know him that well, but have a photo with him somewhere up on one of my websites. And when I organized and ran a summer basketball league in my hometown of upstate New York, and always liked Coach Carl, and believe that that's really whatever they design up there in Sacramento is going to turn that team around in some way. So let's get back to some some football here. Speaking of the media, I can tell you this from other data, and I've been very blessed to be accurate over the years with things like quarterback ratings and certain data like that the media sort of puts a spin on or uses that they think is influential. So let me just briefly mention, one of the big things you hear a lot about is home versus road. This team, like for instance, the Cowboys are really good on the road, or New Orleans is bad at home, good at home but bad this year and now good on the road. Home and road is overvalued, or at least misinterpreted or misrepresented by media members for sure, and I even think some head coaches, most head coaches to be honest with you. But home and road, as I've noted before, other than certain surely, cognizant and recognizable factors like traveling, or if you're in Seattle, the crowd noise, or in Denver, the altitude, or even in maybe Chicago, the playing field conditions, and or the weather, cold versus warm, but certainly probably mostly travel and familiarity with the surroundings. But home and road is overrated. What's more important or more valuable is the quality of the talent that you're playing in those teams, and how these teams are power ranked, as we use in the NFL ESP system, and the power ratings of these teams in that differential, which is called the power spread. So quite simply put, and you've heard me say this repeatedly, how home field advantage, and I'll make a point of this right after, is basically timely officiating biased calls. That's the greatest point value, and that's in relation to crowd noise. But if you are a team who's, let's say, playing the best team in the NFL on the road every week, you're going to have a bad road record. But if you're playing the Girl Scouts or the Boy Scouts, you might be 8-0 on the road, but the quality of your opponent is weak. So it really doesn't matter where you're playing them, home or road. It's not going to be as consequential as people make it out to be. What's more important is the quality in the listing, as I mentioned, of the power rankings and the power spread of the opponent. And a lot of it is just coincidence, or just the scheduling process. You happen to play a weak division, or your division is weak and you play them twice a year, and there's 4 road games you're going to play, or 3 road games, I should say, and you might do really well and look better on the road than you are, but you're just the king of the weak division. So, again, it's just really overrated the way it's portrayed in the media, and I know also by head coaches. So, anyway, having said that, and speaking of home field advantage, or disadvantage in our case, because I had projected last week that one of the best plays on the board was San Francisco to win straight up against Seattle, and I would still stand by that and say that we were, as I always say, on the right side, which means you knew the team would be motivated, San Fran in this case against Seattle, and would play well and cover what our power spread was, or manufacture enough points to overcome that and make the game 50-50, and that game really was a 50-50 game. It was much closer than the 10-point difference and the final tally that the score indicated, and 4 points of that right there was on an atrocious bad call against San Francisco when a couple players tackled Russell Wilson, and with a helmet to the chest, it was called for roughing the passer. Now, again, in Seattle's, looking from their perspective, with that crowd noise and battling for a playoff position and defending Super Bowl champions, you have to expect you're going to get a quote-unquote home cooking call like that. It's just part of the game. It's what home field advantage is. And like I said, this season, it's the highest ranked it's ever been in the history of our studying the NFL, my studying the NFL, which I've done for actually 45 years now, at least. So, 45. So, anyway, it's tragic to see that, but and really cost Seattle not only from the investment side that game, or if it was a tie in some circles, but in the rest of their season. I think you're going to see a real drop off in them because that was sort of their peak performance, just the same way we projected and I projected to Coach Trestman you would see in the Bears. Their peak performance was their comeback attempt against Dallas a couple weeks back, and then this week, or last week I should say, week 15, they lost to New Orleans. They did, however, from an NFL ESP perspective, go for another 2-point conversion and convert it. And I had noted to Coach Trestman, if he had his analytics person there look at the data, the Bears lead the league in 2-point conversions, that we had espoused and encouraged Coach Trestman to do from the beginning of the season. Not only lead the league in the amount and the conversions and the points and the production, but if you even looked at as a parallel, their 4th down and 2 attempts, or 4th and 2 or longer, maybe between 2 or 3 or 4 yards, as we span out the chart, they're very effective at that. And then if you want to go another level, you look at their 3rd and 2s. And their 3rd and 2s, they're very successful. So, as I told Coach, if you really want to optimize your scoring in NFL, and now they're even proposing perhaps moving again, as I noted from the beginning of the season, and we all know the extra points back, but also now narrowing the crossbar, or the uprights, I'm sorry. So, again, it's always more effective and more productive to constantly go for two-point conversions for the most part. And the conversion chart, shouldn't be when to go for two-point conversions as it is now, but it should be when to only settle for 1 point. So instead of seeing a typical 7-14, 21, 28 game, you should see 8, 16, 24, and 32 as the standard or the model for scoring. And especially if you're the underdog team and need to be more aggressive. So anyway, having said that, we're about 15 minutes in. Just give me a couple more minutes here, and then we'll recap last week, go over the playoffs, and then cover the games from an investment perspective. So part of something else I wanted to mention about television and what was going on is the broadcast and how NFL ESP would be effective in the Tennessee-Jacksonville game. Really low-rated game. I mean, that's millions and millions of dollars failed to come in from advertisers, broadcast on the NFL Network when you have a matchup of poor teams. This is part of what the NFL ESP system can do. It can prognosticate for you who are going to be the best matchups, whether it be player on player or player records or monumental achievements or playoff battles or tight games or power-rated close games or interesting games. From the beginning of the season. So when scheduling the TV games, especially the ESPN Monday night games and the Thursday night games, you would get the peak, most productive performance or matchup that would lead to the best performance, and then that would increase ratings, and that would increase the financial assets for the network who's broadcasting those games from the advertiser. So again, it's just another aspect of the effect in the ability and the production supplied by NFL ESP and extended strategic principles. Something else I wanted to note here regards to television, I was pleased to see the U Part 2 with Director Billy Corbin, who I've had some connections and interactions with, and as an alumnus of the U football program. I was really pleased to see Coach Davis on there, who I've actually played for and had seen him have his change in his spiritual nature. From being somebody who might not have been as Christian or godly inclined as he is, I believe, now, which is a real blessing to see. So I'm quite pleased about that. Speaking of spiritual blessings, I was more than happy and pleased, as I'm sure he was, God bless Cam Newton, for mentioning God and how God saved him and blessed him through his injury in his car accident. And something else I really love about Cam Newton that I can personally attest to is his not wanting to take any kind of drugs or medication for any kind of injury. I know this myself as one who's been clean and sober from drugs since 1991, and this even includes aspirin. Okay, I can get a root canal and I won't take any drugs. You can pull a tooth and I won't take any drugs. Because it's just when you're an addict or a recovering addict, and I'm not, outing or pointing out Cam Newton. I'm just saying it's to your spiritual best and godly best to not take any drugs anyway. But especially if you've had an issue with them early on in your life, no matter what the drug, pain pills, prescription, aspirin, any drug at all. And so this is totally to be respected by Cam Newton, and God bless him, and thankful that he's perhaps will be in the back in the lineup for Carolina this week. Something else going on in the NFL, they're talking about playoff expansion, and now just give me 2 more minutes, and in the last 10 we'll go over the games from the investor side. But playoff expansion, as I noted, and I wrote this somewhere, there's a simple formula. I don't want to elaborate on all of it here, but it's basically something similar to this. You want to look at the number of teams in your league, and you really only want to allow 33 to 40%, really probably just a third, into the playoffs. Okay? And then the other thing you want to factor in is you want to, the shorter the season, you want to be more exclusive with the teams who can get into the playoffs. Okay? Now, I know that differs from the 33%. I mean, the 33% is the number of teams, but you also want to factor in the length of the season. For example, baseball could be more inclusive of teams in its playoffs system. Football, NFL football, which is only a 16-game season, needs to be more exclusive. So I don't believe that the NFL should expand the playoffs and dilute the formula that's working now. It's a pretty good model right now to have division winners and 2 wild cards. Anything more is really, like they diluted the Hall of Fame to let pop culture figures in there. Okay, it's working the way it is now. You want to be the most productive, have the most performance value, the best excitement, the best value to the game, you really don't want to expand the playoffs, because I can tell you one thing: you really can't go back. Okay, if you see this, you expand 1, 2, 3, 4, however many teams make the playoffs, you don't see teams like the NFL now or any league cutting back on the amount of teams, excluding teams from the playoffs. So once you expand, you can't go back. So I hope that the NFL does not do that. The last note I want to make is about the power spread was the change in the Johnny Manziel versus Brian Hoyer game, and I mentioned Cam Newton a little bit earlier. I wanted to make a note how from the what we again call the power spread, our ratings would have been different, but from the people who published the number in Las Vegas, with Brian Hoyer starting, or projected to perhaps start, the Browns were a 2-point underdog in their game versus Cincinnati. Once they announced that Johnny Manziel would be starting, that line, plus public opinion, moved a lot to Cleveland -2. So that was basically putting a 4-point value or 3-point value on Johnny Manziel. Ironically enough, in the Carolina game, the spread, when Newton got injured and announced that he was going to be out and that Derek Anderson would be the starting quarterback, that line only moved about 2 points. So amazingly, the difference between Hoyer and Manziel was rated about the same as the difference between Newton and Anderson, and that doesn't seem appropriate, does it not? My point being is, while Las Vegas might have thought Anderson and Newton were relatively equal, or Cam Newton only worth 2 points to Carolina, I think Cam Newton is worth more to Carolina than that, and I also believe Johnny Manziel is actually worth more than Hoyer, although he totally underperformed, which was to be expected because of the situation of coming in the game when he did, or the season when he did, and he did underplay a little bit. But again, the Bengals were hugely motivated by quote-unquote Johnny Football and the money sign, and that's really, and I've mentioned to Coach Trestman on countless occasions, that want, W-A-N-T, that the King David and Goliath factor. If you really want something and you spiritually want it, you're going to logistically and pragmatically want it. You're going to do the things that it takes to win. And there's nothing greater than that human motivation, that energy, that adrenaline. And why Cleveland had theirs for that one sole human being playing quarterback, the entire Bengal organization basically was against Cleveland. The entire that quarterback, that team, that city, and that motivation really propelled Cincinnati to victory. And I can get a little more of some of the X's and O's, and I think that the coaching could have done a better job, and I believe that you would have saw a completely different result had Manziel been in there all season long instead of being thrust under that pressure in that late in the season in that type of game, in that situation. There were a lot of things going against him, and I think you're going to see, and we'll get into the investments now, a change in that from last week to this week in the Cleveland game. So last week, going over quickly, Arizona played St. Louis. A lot of people invested in Arizona. We thought that game could have went both ways. I'm not surprised Arizona covered. KC, Oakland. KC went through the number there. That game was sort of close. Baltimore, that line was too big. We recognized that, but wouldn't have done anything in that game. Really thought Pittsburgh could beat Atlanta. They did. Indianapolis should have Houston actually should have kept that game closer to Indianapolis and covered there. I like Tom Savage. He looked good, but now he's injured. And I think Houston will do better, or probably best, with him at quarterback. I also always like Case Keenum, and I'll get into that in the Houston game this week. Cincinnati, the Cleveland game, we already mentioned. A surprise thought Miami could keep it a little bit closer to New England. Goes to show, again, New England is the Super Bowl. Our pick is the Super Bowl winner. Carolina defeated Tampa Bay as we projected they would, but just by not enough to cover the initial power spread, which was 5.5 points, but even covered the 3.5. But they won outright as we projected they would, and we still project they're going to surprisingly win that division, even though New Orleans did, as we project, beat Chicago pretty easily. But I still think Carolina, for some reason, is I just believe, a better team. They've been beaten and pounded all year with a tough schedule, but I can still foresee Carolina winning that division, although it looks like New Orleans now has a clear lead, and I really didn't study out the rest of that those division games. The Giants beat the Redskins, two bad teams there. Although I give the Giants credit for winning. We projected Buffalo might keep it close to Green Bay, and they did. They actually won straight up, and not surprisingly, I'd said that Green Bay was going to get one more loss this season. There was one team that they had to lose to before they started getting into the playoffs and streaking and making it to the Super Bowl if they can get past Seattle, depending on where that home game is played in the NFC title game, and that came to fruition. Detroit, Minnesota, we projected that would be close. It was. Titans and Jets, very close down to the wire, two bad teams. Really thought San Diego would beat Denver. We were wrong here. I admit we were wrong. I looked at the game some, more so watched the San Francisco-Seattle game. Not sure what happened in that game. Just Denver played better, just a better team, or we just looked at that game. So I admit I was wrong on that. When Seattle, San Francisco already talked about, also was a little wrong on the Eagles in Dallas. Thought the Eagles could actually win twice, but as I noted to one of my partners, it's very tough to win as a favorite on Sunday night. It's very tough to win twice in the same division as they did. And then there was a third factor that I forgot, that the people were mostly investing in Philadelphia. So you had to know that Dallas was a live team there. And lastly, as I mentioned, the Bears, I think, have sort of put a wrap on this season, and with the quarterback change have really personified that this week, and they lost to New Orleans. So this week, Week 16, we already talked about Tennessee, Jacksonville a little bit, but we like Tennessee as what do we call a favorite underdog. Usually, sometimes if a team is a 3-point favorite, right on 3, the number doesn't really move, that they're really an underdog from the metrics and the data, but and I can't get into it here because of time constraints, but they're the live play. And if they were the really live play from the favorite side, they'd be 3.5 points. But they were an underdog value at -3, and they ended up covering. So now looking at this week's games, only studied briefly. I have a lot of other blessed work to be doing, which you can check online on my Facebook page or go on to Twitter, more godly type of work. But the Chargers are playing the Niners. I think that was the Niners' big peak chance last game. Even though people are investing in San Diego, I think you're going to see San Diego beat San Francisco this game. Philly is laying a lot of points, 8 to open to Washington. That's too many points, but again, could you really invest in Washington? Philly should bounce back against Dallas, but I would think that game would probably be a little bit closer, but who knows? It's not worth investing either of those teams, believe me. Miami's laying a clear-cut touchdown to Minnesota. You're probably going to be safe taking Miami, but I think there's better spots here. Green Bay's playing Tampa. A lot of people are investing in Green Bay. I think that's too big a number to give Tampa. If you're giving Tampa 10 points, which the line open, that means you're really projecting Green Bay to be 13 points better than Tampa. No team in the NFL in any season, basically in the last 15 years, has ever been 17 points better than another team. So Green Bay is really pushing the envelope there, or the edge, if you will, being 13 points better than Tampa Bay. And a lot of the teams, and you're going to see this in Week 16 and 17, a lot of the bad teams who are out of it, they play their Super Bowls. Motivationally, this is their chance to knock down a team who's much better than themselves. They always start strong in the first quarter, strong in the first half, and cream ultimately rises to the top, as the expression goes. But in the beginning of the games, and even throughout, if they're if they have the ability to carry that momentum, and the expression, the longer keep an underdog in the game, the better chance they have. You're going to see that with a lot of these underdogs. They're going to play really above themselves to play their Super Bowl, to especially knock out playoff contenders, but also unseat teams like Tampa here against Green Bay. So I think that'll be a closer number. As I mentioned already, even the change from Jay Cutler to Clausen, I think the Bears are motivationally really struggling, and I think Detroit can basically go through the 6.5 or now the 8-point number there and do that handily. New Orleans and Atlanta, we've been pretty accurate on every New Orleans game. We picked them 7 in a row or 6 in a row, even home and road. And by the way that's going, you'd want to take Atlanta and the points here against New Orleans. I wouldn't take either of these teams. But you would want to lean toward Atlanta. New England's laying 11 to the Jets. The Jets kept this game close last time. If this isn't their Super Bowl will be the last week against Miami. You'd have to probably take the Jets here. Pittsburgh and Kansas City. I think Pittsburgh is the better team, but this might be sort of a manipulative number, that this number should be 2.5, but which means Kansas City's live by the data. But because everybody's going to be playing Pittsburgh, which you can darn well bet that Kansas City's the live play, I'm just so unsure on this game. I already talked some about Cleveland. I think Johnny Manziel is going to play a lot better. I think you're going to see a lot better out of Cleveland. I think they can keep this game actually close to Carolina. Baltimore's playing Houston. Everybody's investing in Baltimore. I would lean toward Houston. I would definitely lean toward Houston if it's Case Keenum. I would have if it was really Tom Savage. If it's Tad Lewis, not so much. That's a tough game. The Rams are playing the Giants. Bad game all the way around. Oakland's playing Buffalo. I think Oakland will probably play their Super Bowl here against Buffalo and try to knock them out of playoff contention. Dallas is playing Indy. It doesn't really matter to me about DeMarco Murray. Indy's the better team, but if they rest their players, then you probably have to lean toward Dallas. Arizona's playing Seattle. Too many points to be giving Arizona. Regardless of the playoff situation, I would lean toward Arizona. And the final game, Denver against Cincinnati on Monday night, definitely lean toward Denver. Denver's a positive play since he's overrated. That's it for this week. God bless. This is Mark Anthony DeBello, and this is NFL Moneyball. God bless.